Hi, my name is Juskow and welcome to the English Puzzle Project. In this video, I want to present the general sentence structures in English. How do we construct sentences? And how can I make it out into a model formula for you? Well, when I present this to the students at the university, there are two types of models I like to use. The first is simply what I call the 98% model. Obviously, is the 2% model. These numbers are not really important. I use them to sort of try to represent the frequency of use of the structures in regular everyday English, which model is mostly used and which model is less used. However, it's important to understand both models equally. Now, let's get started with the first model, the 98% model.
The basic sentence structure, the 98% model, has four components. They are the subject, the doer of the action, the auxiliary, which represents the tense, sometimes is considered the helping verb, the verb, which is the action, and the complement, fundamentally just simply the rest of the sentence. Now the subject can be divided into subdivisions if you wish. You've probably seen these before. For example, the pronouns such as I, you, he, she, it, we, you, they. Common nouns, some water, the weather, a video, his book. We could use proper nouns, Montreal, the Pacific Ocean, Rick. We could use possessive pronouns, that is like mine, yours, his, hers, its, ours, theirs. For example, your book is on the table, mine is here. Gerunds or gerund phrases could be used as subjects. An example would be learning English, dancing, speaking in front of people. For example, in a sentence, learning English can be a frustrating experience sometimes. Noun clauses, for example, what you did, why you asked that question. An example of using a noun clause as a subject in a sentence would be, why you asked that question is confusing to me. And finally, demonstrative pronouns. That's this, that, these, and those. An example of a sentence might be, those books are heavy. These are not heavy. The second part is the auxiliary. The auxiliary represents the tense that you want to speak. Sometimes it's referred to as the helping verb. The basic auxiliaries for the basic tenses are do, does, did, be, am, are, is, or was, were, have or has for perfect tenses, will for future, or be going to for future. We could also use modals. Modals function like auxiliaries also. And modals can be things like can, may, might, could, would, should, must. We can also use compound modals, a combination of words to indicate a modal tense, and that would be stuff like had better, have to, have got to be supposed to, be able to, used to, and be used to, for example. The next category are verbs, and verbs represent the action of the sentence. We can have do or have for verbs. Now please note, please remember, do and have can also be an auxiliary verb, or they can be both in a sentence. We will see some examples later on. Go, got, buy, eat, study, play. Also, please do not forget the concept of regular and irregular verbs. This you certainly should know. The last part of the sentence is the complement. Now the complement, as I mentioned, is the rest of the sentence, but what it does is that it gives the information very often that the speaker wants to relate. It answers the information to questions. The questions are what or who. This is also referred to as the direct and indirect object. Where, when, why, which, whose for the possessor. How for the manner, how much and how many, how long or how far, how old, how big, how small, how fast, how hot, how rich, how loud, how anything, how plus any adjective or how plus any adverb. And those four parts represent your basic sentence structure for 98% of the time.
Yeah, I know. A lot of blah, 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 isn't there? Sorry about that, but it's important. It's a 98% model. It's used a lot. You hear it all the time. You're going to read it and you're going to see it. So it's really important to be able to understand the parts of the sentences. You're going to have your subject. You're going to have your auxiliary, your verb, and your complement 98% of the time. So it's good to know. It's good to look at. It's good to be able to identify. And let's do that now. Let's take a look at some examples and let's see.
To put these sentences into its different sects or different pieces, the best idea is to start first of all by finding the verb. The verb is the real action. That's number one to do. Number two, find the subject, the person who does the action. After that, it's very easy to find the auxiliary or auxiliaries. Sometimes there's more than one, but they are going to be found in between the subject and the verb. The next step is to find the complement or complements. Again, it's very possible to have more than one. Now remember, the complement is a function of the logical question. It is the answer. So the complement equals the answer, which equals the answer to the logical question. Now let's take a look at some examples here. Here we have four sentences with basically this very, very similar information in between, and we're only changing these sentences a little bit. Let's take a look at the first one and let's decide, okay, well, what's the verb? So clearly the verb is the action by. Then we look at the action at the subject, who does the action, and this is she. Well, then after that, will is going to indicate your auxiliary. Now we have two complements. The first one is some food. Now this is a complement because it's going to answer the question what. What will she buy? She will buy some food. And the next one and the last one is at the store because this is going to answer the question where. Now let's take a look at the second sentence. She's going to buy some food at the store. The information is essentially the same. It's exactly the same as a matter of fact, except for the fact that we're using be going to. In this case, you will notice that we have two auxiliaries instead of one. Is one, and going to, I consider another auxiliary. It depends on your teacher, it depends on how your teacher has been trained. Other teachers call this a helping verb, etc., etc., but it's not really to be too concerned about. I like to use the term auxiliary. It's just for the simplicity's sake, and nothing gets disturbed as a result. However, we have an important note, really important, and that is to know what is the first auxiliary. And in this case, the first auxiliary is. That's because the first auxiliary is always the functional auxiliary. If you're going to make the negative, you need to use just the first auxiliary. For example, she isn't going to buy. If you're going to use the question, the yes-no question, we use the first auxiliary. Is she going to buy? Really important. Now, let's take a look at the next examples, number 3 and number 4. We're using the present tense. She buys some food at the store. I or you or we or they buy some food at the store. Please notice the difference. For the third person in the singular, he, she, or it, we always need an S on the verb. So, she buys with an S. I need to hear it when you're speaking. Otherwise, I think, oh my goodness, the poor student cannot speak English. That's very embarrassing. Now, for the other, I, you, we, they, then it's just the verb in the regular present form. Now, take a moment, pause your video, and I want you to cut the sentence into the pieces. Find the subject, find the auxiliary, find the verb, find the complements. Should take you just a couple of minutes, or even seconds, I would expect. Okay, notice there is no auxiliary, or there doesn't seem to be an auxiliary. That's because the auxiliary is invisible. Okay, we have the she buys in the present and I, you, we, they buy in the present, but no seemingly auxiliary. Well, that's because, again, the auxiliary do or does is invisible because the verb is already expressed in the simple present. She buys and I buy some food. So it's not necessary to repeat the auxiliary. Here are the four examples, and there they are with the dissected parts and the separated points. Alright, in the next part, we want to make the negative. And in the negative, what we do is we take the auxiliary and we just make the auxiliary in the negative form. It's very simple. So, she will buy is going to be changing for she won't buy. She is going to buy, she isn't going to buy. In the present, when the auxiliary is negative in the affirmative sentence, in the negative we need to use the auxiliary does. She doesn't buy. And again, notice the does absorbs or takes the S. I, you, we, they don't buy. Okay, in the simple past, similarly, the auxiliary becomes negative because we just use the verb in the past tense. So, she bought some food, or I, you, we, they bought some food. You know what? There's no difference in the past. It's only in the present that we have to be concerned about the S form. To change for the negative, all we need to do is just use the past, did, and the negative form, she didn't buy some food, and I didn't buy some food. To continue on now, in this case, in this point here, you pause the video and you take a look at these three examples, divide them up into the parts, and then start the video again and see what the answers are and if they correspond to your ideas.